Chapter 7. Aisha. When Aisha bint Luas was given an order by her king, she obeyed. There were fights worth picking, and then there were fights with Omar bin Malik. One-sided battles fought with gilded words and patronizing smiles. It was a battlefield Aisha avoided at all costs. She was a thief, not a politician. Her victories were claimed with blades, shamshirs lined with silver blood of her victims. Still, that didn't mean she was also happy about acquiescence. She'd been irritated when Omar asked to meet her in the courtyard after his dinner, and now, with his message beating through her head, she was even more annoyed. Her unexpected encounter with the youngest prince had only soured her mood further. She'd been looking forward to spending the night curled up in her favorite window alcove, with only her knives and whetstone for company. Yet here she was delivering a message to one of the Sultan's most infuriating soldiers instead. She dragged her feet through corridors glowing with moonlight and up stairwells illuminated by dusty lamplight until she came to the Cade's room in the soldier's hall, unmarked except for an evil eye charm hanging on the door. She knocked, 4 quick taps followed by 2 louder raps. The door flew open to reveal a bulky, middle-aged man in a turban. The Cade scowled when he saw her. Thief is not my name. She crossed her arms. Can you say Aisha? The Cade ignored her, stepping aside and gesturing her into the room. Aisha walked past him, eyes flicking from the weapons lining the walls to the scrolls strewn across his desk. It certainly looked like a room belonging to the Sultan's military leader. What do you want, bin Luas? He eyed her warily as he closed the door. I have a message for you from Prince Omar. She paused to relish the fear in his eyes before continuing. My king brought your concerns to the Sultan. Fortunately, His Majesty dismissed them. So, as per his original proposition, Prince Omar will be sending some of my comrades to fill the gaps in your security by the end of the month. For a few moments, the Cade simply gaped at her, lips flapping uselessly as he tried to form a fruitless argument. But then he clamped his jaw shut and stepped toward her, eyes flashing. Why does the prince not deliver this message to me himself? Because he's a royal pain in my ass. Ask him yourself. I wasn't sent here to answer your questions. She moved toward the door and managed only a single step before the Cade blocked her way. Tell your prince that there are no holes in my security. My men are more than capable of protecting this city. We do not want your help. We do not need it. Aisha could have laughed in his face. All these fools ever did was throw people in the bowels and cringe at silver blood. Even the Sultan knew his men were incompetent. Gods knew they'd been unable to protect his late wife. Aisha wasn't conceited enough to call herself a hero, but at least she never let any of the targets escape. Not since she'd picked up a blade and promised to kill them all anyway. His Majesty seems to think otherwise. Perhaps it was all your pleading. A competent leader wouldn't need to build his case with words. His actions would speak for him. She briskly sidestepped the Cade and headed for the door. The man was visibly shaking with rage, and when he turned toward her, it was with a speed that made her tense. But the Cade's only riposte was his words, which he hurled at her like throwing knives. Do not think this scheme will give you power over us, bint Luas. He glared at her. You all are killers. No one ever mistakes you for soldiers. Aisha looked at him for a long moment, and then she snorted and turned away. What did he think soldiers were if not glorified murderers? She didn't bother with a response as she ducked outside. A cool breeze nipped at her clothing as she shut the door, ruffling her cloak and tugging at her hood. For a few moments the world stilled, and Aisha let herself savor the tranquility of the night. It was not lost on her that this type of quiet was rare in this place, but she did not mind it. The silence was somnolent rather than tense, and reminded her of the refreshing calm that rolled in after a storm. Even the weather was pleasant, not yet frigid, but cold enough to comfortably don extra layers of clothing. She was still savoring the peace when a blur of motion caught her eye, and she looked up to see a messenger, marked as such by his satchel. The man lowered his gaze as he approached, and Aisha noticed his shoulders tense as he brushed past her. It was not until he was on the stairwell that he visibly relaxed. Aisha watched him disappear without comment. She was accustomed to this type of encounter. Those who knew her kept their guard up. She supposed it was for the better. as she preferred avoiding conversation with spineless fools when possible. Still, she pictured what it might be like to wander these halls as a visitor rather than a thief, to be catered to rather than avoided. She let the musings evaporate as she started back the way she came, heading down the stairwell and back to the ground floor. As she strode down the corridor in the direction of the thief's hideout, she was aware of every flicker of light and motion. She didn't miss the servants who shrank away from her or the soldiers who glared at her with open hostility. And she did not miss the footsteps trailing hers, the tread that was familiar to her as her own breathing. She didn't so much as flinch when Omar fell into step beside her, appearing from God knows where. He did that sometimes, appeared suddenly from the shadows like a wraith. It irked her that she couldn't always hear him. "I'm not delivering any more God's damned messages for you," Aisha muttered. Omar clicked his tongue. "I take it the Cade didn't receive news well. Working under him is going to be hell." Omar flashed a pleasant smile at her. Even in the darkness it was dazzling. "Then it's a good thing you won't be one of the people I assigned to his security force." Aisha turned away with a grumble. "I'd stab you in the throat if you tried to shove me into that uniform. Is this infiltration really necessary?" Omar chuckled. "It is not an infiltration if everyone but the Cade consents to it. You know as well as I the failings of Medine's security. My own brother was assaulted by a jinn in the souk today, you know." "A jinn you ought to have killed," she thought, but didn't voice the opinion. Omar's torturous games had never appealed to her. She preferred to kill her targets on sight, with as little struggle as possible. There was little point in playing with something that would end up dead. Your idiot brother walked into the souk of his own accord. Another laugh from Omar. "You don't find his little ventures courageous?" "I find them foolish." They were walking through the orchard now, down a path that shot past trees heavy with apples and oranges. Dimly lit lanterns hung from some of the branches, coating the ground in a hazy light that made the grass shimmer. It looked, Aisha thought, like it was covered in dew. She plucked a golden apple from a branch in passing and tossed it absently between her palms. "What do you want from me, Saidi?" Omar blinked at her in full innocence. "What? Can I not simply enjoy your company?" "Don't flatter me. You do not enjoy someone else's company without an ulterior motive." She bit into the apple, wrinkled her nose at the tartness. When Omar flexed his fingers at her, she was more than happy to toss it to him. "How foolish of me." The prince held the apple up. Its color was dulled in the moonlight. "I should know better than to attempt casual conversation with you." He bit into it, putting the conversation on hold. They walked the rest of the way to their hideout in companionable silence, following the path to the outer palace wall and then to an unassuming tower that stood sentinel at its southeast corner. The building was a shadow amongst the pale minarets, an ominous-looking place that leaned so heavily against the wall it looked in danger of crumbling over. "Ostentatious locations make for the best hiding places," Omar had once told her when she asked why he situated their base here. He claimed it was easier to keep secrets from nobles who consciously avoided them than from curious commoners who hero worshipped them. Aisha didn't care about any of that. There was a door on the side of the palace wall they could use to slip covertly out into the city, and that was all that mattered. The less time she had to spend walking through this gold-plated trap, the happier she was. She turned to Omar expectantly. The prince was twirling the apple core by its stem, lips upturned slightly. "You want to know why I'm following you?" "Guilt." Aisha frowned at him, unimpressed. "Don't give me that look. I wanted to apologize for dismissing you so abruptly earlier. My brother has a bad habit of asking questions he won't understand the answers to. I thought it better to avoid this conversation with him." "You wanted to avoid the Cade, too. That's why you sent me to speak with him." "I'm expected to be pleasant at court. You, on the other hand," he smirked. "I appreciate you using that needle-sharp honesty for the greater good." "I did it because you ordered me to, you bastard." But she found her lips quirking despite the thought. She liked the prince, enough that she didn't mind taking orders from him, occasional frustrating fights aside. He was straightforward and honest and didn't waste time on words he didn't mean. "Shukran, Aisha." Omar considered her with a tilt of his head. I promise I won't hand you over to the Cade. That hard-headed security fool doesn't deserve you." "No, he doesn't." She huffed out a sigh. "Now, am I free to go?" "Of course. I just wanted to thank you." He paused to look up the tower, and Aisha followed his gaze to one of the windows above. Her window, hidden behind a gossamer curtain that fluttered softly in the breeze. "And I suppose I wanted to warn you." She snapped back to attention at his words. Omar was looking at her again, all traces of his smile gone. "The jinn who attacked my brother still skulks through the shadows. Be careful that it does not ambush you. And if you do see the jinn, leave it to me. It's my mark." Aisha bristled. She knew she had a tendency to steal kills, but why should it matter who destroyed the creature condemned by the gods? Creatures who would tear down the entire village, who would ruthlessly slaughter children and carve their victory into their victims' flesh. She dug her nails into her palm, hard enough to root herself in the present. The scars hidden beneath her cloak itched at the memory. "Fine," she said brusquely. The reluctant admission seemed to be enough for Omar. He was smiling again when he excused himself for the night. Once he was gone, Aisha sighed and got to work on the overcomplicated door locks. Eventually the bolts gave, and she was about to enter the tower when she heard the sound of crunching grass and froze. She glanced over her shoulder, her fingers hovering over one of the knives on her belt. But though she could have sworn she heard footsteps, there was nothing behind her but tree-shaped shadows swaying in the breeze. Aisha watched the darkness for a long time, just to be sure no one was there. Then, disgruntled with herself for being so jumpy, she stepped into the tower. The last thing she heard before she slammed the door shut was the ominous susurration of the wind, which sounded uncomfortably like laughter.